How so far, if at all, do we dissipate the chilly veil over the question of being, if we follow what Eric Voegelin says in his Science, Politics, and Gnosticism, where he identifies communist thinking and Heideggerian thinking under the tag of a profound feature of human nature through which what he says in what follows is meant to spring up. He speaks of the central element of Gnosticism as, quote, the experience of the world as an alien place into which man has strayed, and from which he must find his way back home to the other world of his origin. Who has cast me into this suffering of the world, asked the great life of the Gnostic text, which is also the first alien life from the worlds of light. It is an alien in this world, and this world is alien to it. So Geworfenheit has castedness into the strange sojourn and this earth where everything is denied us, and where love is something strange, and where wonder is something rare, and where harmony is something one seldom will see, especially in political life. I'm thinking about this, if there's a kind of historicist, if thematizing an historicist unconscious is of any use. Going from the beginning, we have this useful basis in Adolf Bastian's Elementargedanken, elementary thoughts or concepts, which have been taken, which this idea, which has been taken over by figures as diverse as Franz Boas, who initiated the modern anthropology or ethnology, which is now in power throughout the world. The idea of difference rather than development or civilizing process being the key there. And figures like Jung with the archetype figures. And so with Jung, we have here the elementar Gedanken, when they're transformed form as the archetypes, then becomes the basis for the content of the phylogenetic unconscious. Let me give one citation from Heidegger, where Heidegger speaks not of those ideas particularly, but in his basic concepts book, the Grundbegriffe, he says in the first paragraph, quote unquote, basic concepts, dash, of what? The title of this lecture does not say, hence what is supposed to be grasped by these concepts remains unclear. Quote unquote, concepts are said to be representations, Vorstellungen, in which we bring before ourselves an object or entire regions of objects in general. Quote unquote, basic concepts then are the most general representations of the most possibly encompassing regions, such regions are nature, history, quote unquote, the state, quote unquote, the law, humanity, animal, or whatever else. However, in the lecture's title, there is no, I'm continuing to read from the first paragraph, there is no talk of the basic concepts of nature, of art, and other regions. The title does not specify anything of this kind, for which the quote-unquote basic concepts are supposed to be such basic concepts, whether for the investigation of art history or jurisprudence, for chemistry, mechanical engineering, or any other quote-unquote subject area or field of human practice. Perhaps the unsupplemented title, quote-unquote basic concepts, means this, that it does not treat a particular regions of beings, nor of the corresponding sciences that investigate them individually. I asked one potent question we could put to this is, at this stage, has Heidegger given off the existentialist moment, where we draw such things as death guilt, and other basic uncertainty, other basic features of life, and categories them as these existentials, which some way thematize all Dasein. Does he still hold with that? We know that he's given off later on the whole, speaking a great deal about death. He gave that off very early on, and perhaps with some reason. If one thinks in terms of a constellation of elementar Gedanken that must be in every Dasein, and then which are simply developed differently. So, for instance, there's sex, and then sex becomes either eros to erotic, as we've been going through with the Western, with the examples of Iliad in uh, the Judgment of Paris and other such issues, and with the whole thematization of sexuality in the East as it's um, lacks the moral characteristics, the ethical characteristics, the idea of vice connected to it, as we showed in the examples with Japan, or for instance with death, where one could say the Hindu world has got the solution to the problem of death under control with the idea of reincarnation. The West has other ideas about that, but each culture will have its own thematize this in its own way. Maybe, but is that necessary? Could there still be existence that didn't have necessarily these existentials? If that existentials in those sense can be also elementar Gedanken, or even basic concepts. Does basic concepts handle this? If you go in Jung, and Jung proposes himself as being less um, conservative, as it were, than Freud. It's in Jung, the Freudian unconscious is too narrow because it's kind of it points, as Freud points to this, Plato's Politeia, and he says here's all these dreams that the Athenian has of killing his father, and what will the Athenian do if he had this ring of Gyges, and all these questions. But they're all basically about the personal life of someone within a certain cultural world, and the problem is basically biographical, and within that one lifetime, something happens traumatic at the beginning of the life, and then it gets you on the wrong track, and then it needs to be righted so that you can function within that society. The idea of functioning within the society being the meaning of the notion that Freud is conservative. And then Jung says here, but beside from that, which may be the personal shadow or so, we also have this deeper unconscious, which is the phylogenetic unconscious connected to the history of the species. And this he then links to the so-called elementar Gedanken, the elementary ideas. And then this he proposes in this style, which then you can see taken up in majestic form by Joseph Campbell. This universality theme of the myth and so on. So here, if we had a historicist unconscious, it would refuse to allow the basis in a constellation, a fixed constellation of the elementary ideas. And so you could have a thematized, a third position with the sort of um, chilly obscurity, which is we tried to dissipate by studying Heidegger with regard to ultimately to the question of being, and then also which should awaken us to remember in that question, so far as we can make that question, so to speak, confront us, make it so to speak concrete to ourselves as best we can to perhaps not give ourselves over to it, but to somehow confront it rather than give ourselves over to it, or than to try to instruct it. We can then see how Heidegger has in something which analogically could be brought into contact with what Nietzsche says about Socrates. Socrates is the first theoretical man, but also that Socrates has created this, which Hegel, of course, as is well known, later cast as tragic by destroying the values of the Athenians in some way, this sort of sleepy going along with the dealings as they were and awakening them to the fact that they don't know what they think they know. And in this way, we have something like that in Heidegger, but what we couldn't always forget is that we can treat Heidegger as though he already knew the answers to these questions rather than was shaking up the situation and showing us that we must confront this situation.